Coming up, Dan Mullen takes a shot at Georgia. Could the rivalry between the Dogs and the Gators be starting to heat up? We'll talk about it all next right here on SEC Country Live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We got a lot to react to here over the course of the next few minutes together as we look back on National Signing Day, kind of look ahead to what's next for a lot of these teams, and there'll be some interesting stuff on that coming up throughout the show today. But a big week here for the SECs. A lot of these teams got better. Yeah,
it definitely did, and you look it over. Now you can start to evaluate the whole roster, I feel like, moving forward, and you get into spring practice, you check out who the early enrollees are, see who's going to be showing up in July, and start moving towards the next season.
Before we get to any of those nuts and bolts issues, though, how about a little soap opera drama? How about a little shot taken at a rivalry, a rival from upstate? It is Florida coach Dan Mullen. Now, let me set the stage here. It's item number 1 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and my reaction to the Mullen thing may surprise you a little bit. I'll get to that. Let me just sort of set the whole thing up. Mullen speaks to the media on National Signing Day, does his deal the way that all SEC coaches do, and then like a lot of other SEC coaches, he also then goes and speaks to boosters and some fans and some donors to the program. And as you might imagine, the speech to the donors is very different than the speech to the media. 24/7 Sports caught this from Dan Mullen as he's speaking to his fans. The very first question out of the box to him was about Georgia and the #1 class in the country for the Dogs. And Mullen says, listen, winning one SEC championship game doesn't make you a dominant program. You know what I'm saying. And 2 of the last 3 years, we've been to the SEC championship game. So even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. That's Mullen, 2 Gators fans. It's important to remember this was not meant to be a public remark. Right. 2 Gators fans via 24/7 Sports there. What's your thought about what Dan Mullen has to say?
I think this is the approach he has to take. And obviously, a lot of Georgia fans aren't going to like it. I think Georgia fans, no matter what Dan Mullen said yesterday, still feel comfortable about where that program is headed, and they should. But I think this is what Dan Mullen has to say. I think he's got to take this route. You didn't get as good of a class as you might have wanted. Your fiercest rival within the SEC, Georgia, hits an absolute grand slam on their signing class. So when you're speaking to the people that are wearing that orange and blue, you got to go out on a limb and say something like this to try to take some shine off of what Georgia's doing and put it back on your program down at Florida. I don't mind it as much as some people might.
Brian Skibicki in the comment section, hilarious line, says, first thing that comes to mind for me is the line from the movie True Grit. That's mighty bold talk from a one-eyed fat man. That's a pretty funny line there from that standpoint. The truth is, y'all know I'm a Georgia fan, so obviously, when Georgia and Florida plays, I hope that Georgia wins. Florida is my least favorite team in terms of rivals and all the SEC. Y'all understand how all of that goes. But I'm actually not mad at Mullen for saying this, and I don't want these kinds of things to go away. Now, listen, as a Georgia guy on my show, Dog Nation Daily, this morning, did I mention this, and did I want to make sure Georgia fans were aware of what Mullen said? Of course I did. But I also said the same thing then, I'm going to say right now, that I'd be a hypocrite if I was too critical of Mullen for these kinds of things, because the rubber chicken circuit, so to speak, where you go and speak to your fans and you say what they want to hear, the kind of stuff that Steve Spurrier used to be good at, even though as a Georgia guy I didn't like Spurrier very much either, I do like those kinds of things. So yeah, are Georgia people supposed to make a big deal about this? Of course they are. That's the way all this works. But do I want coaches to be buttoned up and be careful you don't say anything like this ever again? No, I don't want coaches to be that careful. I really don't.
I go along with that. And listen, I think this is what Dan Mullen, like I said, this is what Dan Mullen has to do. I think that, anytime you take over for a program, and obviously Dan Mullen knows the ins and the outs, you have to make a splash on the scene. You have to start getting your guys riled up. These are not just events where you're talking about recruits. These are also, there's boosters there. You have to, the funding has to come in. People have to start believing in you. And I think this goes along with what we said a lot about Jim McElwain last year. Did we not say that, this is a program in Florida that likes to say things like this? A lot of the fans at Florida like to back up the talk. They like to be the ones that are targeting other people, going out of their way to say things. I had some fans yesterday ask me in and around Pensacola if the Jacob Copeland thing was staged. Does Dan Mullen, is he trying to get, just a ton of attention put on this signing, making sure everybody knows that he landed Jacob Copeland over some other big programs? Now, I don't think it's staged. I think we're giving a lot of people a lot of credit in that category, but it goes along with how a lot of people see this Florida program. I think that's why Dan Mullen starts to tuck back in with a lot of the fan base.
Maurice Carter says Dan Mullen's picking the wrong time to throw shade and pick at Georgia. Shaking my head. He's not a smart man. And I guess I will ask you some version of that same question. does what Mullen says have to have any basis in truth to be valuable? Because the truth is, he can say, hey, blind squirrel finds a nut. But that blind squirrel beat Florida 42-7 a year ago, beat Dan Mullen's old team, Mississippi State, 31-3.
Right.
So, it's one thing to sort of toss some red meat out towards your constituency. It's another thing to have very little basis in fact for what he's saying.
Well, yeah, listen, you can point to last year. I think that we would both admit that Dan Mullen is better off at Florida, and Florida's better off with Dan Mullen, so it becomes a little bit more of a message. I don't think it's, so cut and dry as to say, Georgia beat his brains in last year. I think that Florida is definitely building something. I don't think it has to be based in fact at all. I think, listen, you go out and say what you're going to say. He could go out right now and say, hey, we're going to beat Florida by 40 this year. It doesn't have to be based in fact at all. He's making the projections. He's trying to get his fan base riled up. He's trying to get the recruits for next year riled up, building towards something. I just think that's your job as a first-year head coach. Start getting the backing of the fan base. Start talking about the players you do have on campus, and I think that's exactly what he's trying to do.
Rostamon Blair, who we have not heard from in a while in our comment section, says, where's the lie in what Dan Mullen has said? 1980, obviously a reference to the last time Georgia won a national championship, reminding Georgia fans to humble themselves. A lot of Gator emojis here. But that wouldn't be particularly fair criticism in my book, because it's certainly a bit of a lack of humility from Mullen here, who should say what he wants to say in front of his own fan base. I've got no problem with that. But this was, 15th, 16th, class in the country. I mean, Kirby Smart in his first year in 2016, coming off part-time work at Alabama and a short recruiting schedule, put Georgia in the top 10. So, Mullen needs to be careful in overselling what he was able to do on National Signing Day and acting like, he's knocking on the door of the Georgia Bulldogs just yet.
Well, listen, he's right though. I mean, he is right to an extent. Where listen, give me 1 year. Obviously, Georgia had an incredible year. #1 recruiting class, played the national title game. Dan Mullen, last time he was at Florida, he had an incredible run. They won 2 national title rings. That's what Dan Mullen knows about his relationship with Florida. So as much as neither one of us project that to be really based in fact, and neither one of us really, are sure that Florida's ready to match up with Georgia next year, I don't blame him for going out and saying it, and it's not like he was smearing words at all. Florida has been to the SEC championship 2 of the last 3 years.
Michael Kleiber, who's a Mississippi State fan in the comment section, this is actually kind of an interesting point, because Michael, given his ties to Mississippi State, would have every reason to dislike Dan Mullen, but he says he actually doesn't mind these kinds of things from coaches and doesn't want this kind of trash talk stuff to go away, which is something I totally agree with. Listen, I want to poke holes at the facts of what Mullen said. I'm going to kind of go back and forth, but the truth is that's sort of what I'm supposed to do. That's what Mullen's supposed to do. We're all supposed to sort of go back and forth with this kind of stuff. And, Mullen said this. Oh, yeah, Georgia beat him 31-3. And Mullen can say, yeah, but look how many times I beat Georgia when I was offensive coordinator at Florida. It's sort of back and forth everybody goes. And, yeah, we all take it probably a little too seriously. But the fact of the matter is that is kind of the way this sport works. So while I'm going to criticize Mullen, I'm going to sort of do it with a smile on my face, because that's the way that he intended those words to begin with.
You should. And let's take this, from an Alabama perspective. We talked about this a couple times during the season last year. Anytime you heard something negative come out, Dabo Swinney taking a jab here and some other coaches taking a jab, what do we say about it? Man, this will be all over the locker room when it comes time. And I have no doubt that Kirby Smart, coming down to that game in Jacksonville, will remind these players about what Dan Mullen said about last year's team. I have no doubt in my mind that Kirby Smart will remind those guys. I think that's another storyline to kind of keep in the back of your head.
Yeah, Greg Steele also making sure that, and this is a good point, I will admit this to Greg and other Florida fans. When I talk about the ranking, he said it's 14, plus you got a lot of talented transfers, and that's true. A lot of these guys are petitioning to be eligible right away. And in terms of adding new talent to the roster, even getting Jordan Scarlett back, I will count that. Yep. Florida's gotten better here during the offseason with its roster. I won't pretend to dispute that. We'll have more of your comments here in the comment section here on SEC Country Live throughout the show on this subject and on everything else that kind of comes up today during the program, including next, item number 2 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list, a report coming out that Alabama losing an assistant coach. The report sort of generates at the NFL ranks. Manish Mehta, I believe the guy we have the tweet here from, who covers the New York Jets, he says, according to his sources, Alabama assistant Carl Dunbar in discussions with the Steelers to be their next defensive line coach. He had worked with Rex Ryan in the past. That's Manish Mehta plugged into the Jets situation. Boy, I'm not going to pick on Alabama for this in particular, because a lot of schools deal with the same stuff. But that's rotten timing. To announce this the day after National Signing Day, that's just, like I said, this is not an Alabama issue, because every team in the world's got this kind of stuff going on, and I don't know how you fix it, but man, that really stinks to say, hey, you just signed the dotted line, your freedom was totally given away yesterday, and your guy Carl Dunbar's not going to be there.
Yeah, it stinks. It stinks, and it goes along the lines of the same thing we talked about in Shane Beamer and Jawan Sider and these guys that, after the early signing period left and headed elsewhere, and it's something that, It's just something that college football is dealing with right now. And I don't really know the answers of how you get this done or how you erase this. I think that, they made a business decision in saying Carl Dunbar needs to stay on staff till after National Signing Day. And it is what it is. It does stink. I don't like it. Obviously being an Alabama guy, I think that, they did what's best interest of their signing class. I don't think they always did what was in the best interest of the players that are coming on board. The player side of me says, man, this stinks. I just don't know how you change it. And I think this is something that every program in the SEC and nationally are going to have to start dealing with, because the way this timeline folds out, I mean, yes, it's after the second National Signing Day, but think about how many coaches have traded places after the first one. I mean, This is something that, we heard from Luke Ford, we heard from some of the guys down in Florida after their transition, and it just stinks all the way around.
How big of a loss would this be for Alabama? I mean, listen, if it's a position coach good to be hired at Alabama, it's a pretty good coach. Alabama's also replaced guys well. We'll hear from Nick Saban later on. He wanted more defensive linemen in this class, didn't quite get enough. How big of a loss do you think Dunbar would possibly be here?
I think it's a big deal for now. I want to see who they replace him with. Obviously, Nick Saban's going to go out. I don't know, what coach you can go out and find at this point in time. I mean, we're approaching middle of February right now in terms of hiring assistant coaches. You're going to have to hire somebody away from somebody else. But I think this goes along the lines of just exactly how I felt about Brian Daboll leaving. Some of these guys are better off suited for the NFL where they don't have to recruit. And a lot of these guys, including Carl Dunbar, spent pretty much his entire career in the NFL not having to recruit. So maybe Nick Saban gets a chance here. Not a good chance, but a chance to get back to his roots of finding young guys with energy that can go out and recruit some of these players.
Steve Bricker says none of this matters a bit. Bama is, was, and will be the class of the SEC in college football, period. But one of the things we heard Saban say a lot, we've heard guys that cover Alabama say a lot, is the attrition with the coaching staff has mattered. Now, I don't know that how many people choose Alabama because of Carl Dunbar. Maybe it's 1 million, maybe it's none. But we have heard that one of the reasons why Alabama's only barely cracking the top 10 in this year's rankings, as opposed to being number 1 overall, where they had been every year since 2010, the changeover with coaching staff makes an impact there. I mean, at a certain point, Alabama's having a hard time sort of holding its dynasty together because so many of these coaches are being poached. I get another example, then I'll let you speak. I'm sorry. Bo Molinari says it's the poach our coach school. Lately, that's what Alabama's kind of felt like.
Well, but I'm trying to allude to this without actually saying it, because I don't think it would be a slap in the face of Carl Dunbar saying this, but I think this is a calculated move on Nick Saban's part more than anything. I think Nick Saban looks at a guy like Carl Dunbar. We wanted to get more defensive linemen. How do we get that done? Okay. How do we get that done? We might need a better recruiter at that defensive line position. You've had Bo Davis in the past, who was an ace, got a little bit of trouble. I don't know who you bring in. And I brought it up on Twitter earlier today, and Alabama fans will know this name. Freddie Roach, who's the defensive line coach over at Ole Miss, knows the state of Alabama, has recruited the Mobile area. Maybe you go get a guy like that who is a better fit to recruit on the recruiting trail.
If that be the case, poor Ole Miss going to have lost his defensive line coach 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
As Trey Scott got poached last year by Georgia, and if Roach gets poached this time around, that's pretty bad luck for Ole Miss. But you do bring up a good point. We've seen a lot of these SEC schools do this. When you swing and miss on big defensive linemen, or at that point in time, maybe the NFL does come calling.
I'm not saying, saying that it's the fault of Carl Dunbar. I don't want to say anything bad about him, but I think this is kind of a calculated move in my opinion.
It is not a terrible theory. I will certainly suggest that. We'll talk to more Alabama fans in our comment section today as well here on SEC Country Live. For now, let me move on to item number 3 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10. And I continue to keep saying the same thing I have been saying about Auburn. An interesting signing day class for Auburn in that the overall number's pretty good, but the buzz around it just not really all that substantial. One of the things that Malzahn talked about yesterday, Auburn coach Gus Malzahn, was it was in a lot of ways a really uneventful February National Signing Day because a lot of the work had gotten done back in December. He was kind of asked about comparing and contrasting the new rules, how December felt different than February, and here's some of what Malzahn had to say.
There wasn't as many players out there, and I think everybody in the country zeroed in on a lot of players. That's really what made it different. But for us, we had our guys committed for a long period of time. And so it was more about us just making sure that we held on to our commitments with everybody coming after them, and our guys did that.
So I think this is interesting. We've come to think of Auburn as being in the top 10 in the recruiting world, but this year they actually finished outside the top 10. But their 24/7 Sports composite score was actually high enough to be in the top 10 a lot of previous years. And in comparison to some other Auburn classes that were in the top 10, this class may actually be better. More 4 stars, for instance, than we've seen in a lot of Auburn classes. So based on the numbers, 16 4-stars, for instance. That's actually a pretty substantial total.
Yeah, it is.
Of 4-star guys. But where's the buzz for this Auburn class? It's amazing how quiet things are for Auburn in comparison to some of the other schools we talked about.
Yeah, it's like I talked about yesterday. I feel like the buzz really was in the early signing period. You signed Joey Gatewood, and obviously you added some players yesterday you feel really good about. I think they're going to feel great about Matthew Hill down the road. Some of the pieces they added yesterday will be big pieces of the team, but I feel like Auburn's buzz really was on December 20th. I feel like they signed, Asa Martin. They signed this group of players that really can contribute right away at Auburn, and you should feel good about it. I mentioned the running back room yesterday. It's going to be a good running back room. Add in Harold Joyner, another couple players that were good players. I just don't think the buzz came down to this second national signing day. I don't think they had a lot of buzz going around the room yesterday, and we mentioned it. Momentum is a real thing as far as signing guys. Auburn never built any up yesterday. They were kind of dealing with what they already had.
Yeah, some of the numbers here. Justin Ferguson running about these at SECCountry.com. 8 for 8 in signing commitments yesterday. All 8 of the guys they had signed didn't actually lose a single commitment for the entire recruiting cycle. Some other numbers I wanted to give you here, and I sort of touched on these a moment ago. Auburn signed 16 4-star prospects. That's the most of the program since 2014. The final composite score for Auburn's 264.18 according to 24/7 Sports. That's greater than the one that it had in 2017 when it finished number 9 nationally. So there are guys like me who would maybe want to suggest, well, if you went from 9th to 12th, you actually sort of decreased in recruiting. But the truth is the overall talent score for the players is actually higher now than it was a year ago. So that's one of those deals where the top 10 score can be just a little bit misleading.
It definitely is. And it's all about what's going on around you, too. I think that, all the attention obviously was on Georgia yesterday for good meaning. Obviously, they pulled a heck of a class out. You're going to look at Alabama as a team who was recruiting in the top 10. I think they finished yesterday at 7. And you also have, listen, I think this is going to be a big storyline moving forward. You also have Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M that were making a lot of noise yesterday within the SEC West. And I think all those things kind of coming together, it just wasn't a splashy day for Auburn. It was a good day, don't get me wrong. They have a good class, but it wasn't like a splashy day where it's going to make headlines with anybody.
So here's the thing, though. You mentioned Alabama and Georgia. Here's the one thing I do think if you're Auburn, you got to be careful of. Recruiting is a zero-sum game. The reason why it matters so much is there are not enough good players to go around. The way we define good players typically is the 4- and 5-star moniker, but the truth is, it's the NFL potential these guys show that put them in that category, and they're just not enough of them to fill every SEC team. Seems like they're a lot, but they're actually not enough. And when Georgia gets more than its fair share, when Alabama, and trying to keep pace with Georgia, gets more than its fair share, the effects are going to be felt somewhere. And I do think the effects are felt a little bit by Auburn. Even though they got their 16, some of the guys that Georgia got maybe in previous years would have gone to Auburn. Maybe it would have gone to Florida at some point. You mentioned Texas A&M. The rise of some of these SEC teams, either good recruiting powers who got more than normal or other programs who are trying to build themselves up, that loss is going to be felt by an Auburn from time to time, or by a Florida from time to time. I mean,
Florida State dove in and got a couple of prospects yesterday that a lot of people didn't expect them to. Tennessee is going to start going along those lines as well, and that's kind of what I point to. It's not that Auburn didn't sign a great class. It's that yesterday Auburn just wasn't in the mix for a lot of these guys. I mean, look at Justin Ross. That's really who was front and center as far as Auburn goes. But they signed who they were supposed to sign. They didn't really, swing and miss on anybody other than, like I said, a Justin Ross. And they already have their class intact. They have good numbers.
William Gunning says Auburn's going to redshirt most of this class, so development's key. We have linemen from previous signing classes that have to pan out. Maybe that's the case. You mentioned Joey Gatewood. That's certainly a guy who I would assume is heading towards a redshirt season. And another example of some development that's going to go down there. This is still an Auburn team that I think is talented enough to be top 10 in the country here for 2018. They're going to get some help from some of these guys. I think maybe Quindarius Monday, maybe the guy on this roster the most likely to play.
I like Matthew Hill. I think Matthew Hill, a wide receiver that obviously is a great player. And I just think that, listen, you talk about the young offensive linemen. We talked last week about how deep this defensive line is moving into next season. Really only lose kind of one player in terms of the sack totals. But you got some pieces at the wide receiver and running back position I feel like kind of fit in right away. I feel like you have to have Asa Martin become a big part of this offense. We talked about that. I don't expect Asa Martin to start, but he is a nice piece, I think, for this next season, for this offense to kind of tinker around with, maybe find their own version of DeAndre Swift like Georgia did last year.
Yeah, no, that's well said for sure. We got more comments coming up here. Let me do item number 4 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10. Listen, day after signing day, a lot of what we're doing today is just sort of going back and sort of hearing from some of these coaches and kind of figuring out where all these classes kind of shook out. We mentioned LSU a moment ago. Maybe a little bit of a disappointment. I know some of what we heard from our LSU fans who watch our show every day, they were certainly lamenting some of the losses for the Tigers yesterday. Here is what Ed Orgeron said, though, that he liked about the LSU class.
This year was the state of Louisiana first. We signed 8 of the top 10 players in Louisiana and 13 players from Louisiana overall, which we're most proud of. We wanted to add linemen, and we did 4 offensive linemen and 5 defensive tackles. We needed to add receivers. We signed 4 receivers, including 2 of the top 5 receivers in the country. We need running backs. We signed 2 very talented running backs, one who's already here. Remember, that's now 9 of our signees are already enrolled and practicing with our football team right now.
So that's Ed Orgeron there. He liked the fact that some of these guys come from the state of Louisiana. Felt really good about that. Feels good about the fact that some of these guys on campus right now. And Orgeron, in that instance, doing what a lot of these coaches do this time of year, which is, spin what he had. But pretty clearly, I think that Ed Orgeron is one of the signing day losers from the SEC ranks, given what we've come to expect from LSU over the years.
Yeah, I just think it's such a slippery slope. And we talked about momentum a minute ago. LSU did not develop. They developed negative momentum yesterday. People started jumping off. And listen, I think there's 3 categories of classes to go into, and it's not science. But I think you have the great classes. I think that Georgia had a great class yesterday. I think you have classes you say, man, we got the guys we should have, didn't get any guys that would have been shockers. I think that's Auburn's class yesterday. LSU is in that kind of dangerous bubble to me where it's not an awful class by any stretch of the imagination, but LSU to me has been kind of in this this rarefied air where they've been pulling in classes and tons of talent and developing them and sending them to the NFL. That if you start losing that stream and you start dipping into the kind of 15, the 15th ranked class in the country, that's a lot of momentum that I think it's going to be tough for Ed Orgeron to kind of build back up. I think that, you look at LSU and you look at all the players they have in the NFL and you say, man, I could go there and really pan out. If they start losing that momentum and not sending players to the NFL, I think a lot more recruits start asking questions about going there.
I think that's a pretty interesting point. Esteban Esteves in the comment section was also talking about how 2018 was the year they had some holes they had to fill. 2019 is the year where they start going after some of the big name type guys. I'm assuming a quarterback may be one of the things that he's thinking about when he says that. The problem, though, is, and you kind of touched on this a moment ago, you got to win some games in the field. And I think that LSU actually needs some help from its 2018 class to be better on the field. Now, they've got some good transfers coming in. I think Braden Fehoko, the defensive tackle, is going to be a really good guy for LSU. So they've got some new blood that's going to be playing well, but they need help in this 2018 class. Ed Orgeron's got to be careful that he has future recruiting classes to point to and future recruiting classes to build towards. I think that he's in a precarious situation. He needs to be very careful. He needs to get lucky. He needs to win a couple of games, and he needs to build some momentum. Because, as you said, right now LSU has none of that.
Yeah, I think I just think he has to be careful. And I think this momentum that LSU gets. And listen, LSU is, like I said, they're in that rarefied air where they're always recruiting at a high level. You always feel good about the talent and the athleticism that LSU has in their program. I think when guys from inside the state or guys that are locks to go to LSU start looking other places, that's when it becomes scary. And then all of a sudden, if you do lose some games that you shouldn't lose, like last year, and then all of a sudden you start missing out on recruits, LSU fans hold this coaching staff and this football team to a higher standard. I mean, they just do. And I think Louisiana fans will agree with me when I talk about that you are expected to have top 5, top 10 classes at LSU. And to slip beyond that and maybe slip beyond 15, I think is a scary thing for a lot of people. And it's not like Ed Orgeron's automatically going to be on the hot seat. But when we talk about trends in the SEC and just kind of keeping that upward trend, I don't like what the trend is right now for LSU.
Christavier Stoney Williams says, did LSU get a quarterback? And it did not. It did not sign one for its 2018 class. And that, to me, is a glaring hole. James Foster ending up at Texas A&M. I don't know that Foster's going to be a great player. I don't even know that he's capable of ever starting at A&M where I expect them to usually have pretty good quarterbacks.
Yeah.
LSU could have used him, though.
Yeah, they definitely could
I don't think he would have won the starting job at LSU either, but he would have made things a little tougher on Miles Brennan, which is what you need someone to do there.
I think that a lot of people around the country, when you talk about recruiting experts, were excited about the upside of James Foster. He's not there yet. He's going to need a little bit of polishing. He's kind of a poor man's version of Emory Jones in that respect. Emory Jones is going to need some polishing as well, but this is a guy who you would have loved to have in a lot of different classes. I mean, like I said, Florida State's going out from LSU, Texas A&M, and Texas A&M wins out in the end. It just was kind of falling along those things where LSU just couldn't build anything yesterday. It was like every kind of decision that was coming down early on in the day, on down through the afternoon, kept getting switched over. Goodrich was another one that heads to Clemson early in the day. You thought that was a huge LSU lock.
And Cliff Nelson says that, I think Goodrich may be who he's referring to. He says offensive and defensive lines were rebuilt with depth. He's obviously talking about LSU. We missed on one big fish, that's Patrick Surtain, who caused us to slow play another defensive back. Our class is underrated due to all the linemen that were signed. So that's an interesting point from Cliff Nelson. It's also interesting as well that this happens. I don't know if this has happened with LSU, but attention paid to Patrick Surtain that amounted to nothing, impacted their ability to go out and sign a Mario Goodrich.
Well, you can't fault them for paying that much attention.
Oh, I'm not faulting them, but it just goes to show you that sometimes losing one recruit has reverberations for another.
And it's a much bigger deal this year than it ever has been in the past with all these other names that were already signed on dotted lines throughout the early signing period. Used to be a place like LSU, and Bama fell into the same trap yesterday. When you don't hit on the big guys, you used to always have four-star guys that right at the last minute you could kind of call and say, hey, listen, we have a spot for you. We really need you. Come join our championship caliber program. Those guys were not there this year. Those guys were already gone. So you tried to call the Glenn Beals of the world yesterday, and guess what? He wasn't interested either. Ends up signing on to Texas A&M. It's a slippery slope for programs like this right now.
Molinari's got a great point. Obviously, Bo's a Texas A&M fan. We hear from him a lot. He says, I'm looking forward to building a rivalry with LSU and Coach O between he and Jimbo Fisher. That rivalry's on its way. You know,
I agree.
I think in a lot of ways, some of what happens between LSU and some of its rivals seems manufactured. Is LSU-Arkansas really a rivalry? I don't know that it is. Maybe LSU fans would say that it is. Certainly A&M in coming into the league has had a hard time kind of getting some of its rivalries established. But A&M and LSU, that thing's going to be sort of a natural, organically growing rivalry here where A&M's going to get some players that LSU wants. I think James Foster's already kind of an example of that. There's going to be more of that in the future. And you know what? These two teams are going to be playing for something because there's not room for all of them at the top. Under Jimbo Fisher, I firmly believe that A&M is on its way up. As it rises, if I'm right, another team's going to fall. And it's either going to be Auburn or it's going to be LSU. I mean, I guess it could be Alabama, but in terms of the biggest threat to Alabama, A&M's trying to push either Auburn or LSU out, and that's what's going to make those games important.
I completely agree. You know, the geographical location of both schools, the fact that you do have a Jimbo Fisher that knows a big amount about recruiting inside of this, the state of Louisiana. So I think that he can kind of go in there and kind of elbow out some room. Right now, you saw just a little bit of it. Moving into 2019, it's going to be a lot bigger deal.
Our buddy Nakia Hester in the comments section remarks with the fact that, I wear Georgia gear all the time. This is the first time, not the only time you've worn an Alabama shirt. You wear the Alabama script A from time to time. This is one of the few Alabama shirts we've seen you wear, though.
Yeah, definitely.
It's actually nice.
Listen, we talked about BA's Georgia swag, his old school swag he's had on throughout the week. I just thought, you know what, it's Thursday, it's the end of the week.
It looks great. I think it looks great.
I obviously love my school.
By the way, can we give an update real quick here? So I don't want to... Y'all give us grief about the Alabama helmet every single day. It's still got the 15 on it. Y'all want the 17 on it. So what my promise was a couple of weeks ago was give us until spring game and we get the Alabama helmet changed. Listen, I could give a rip about this. I have zero motivation to do this for any of y'all, but Mike wants to do it. So we are close to getting the helmet.
I'm hoping by next week when we get on the air on Monday. I'm hoping the 17 is on the helmet.
Here's the difference between a
Can we do a ceremony?
No, we're not.
No ceremony on there?
We're not doing a ceremony.
Okay. Well, I thought it'd be cool.
But here's the difference between you and me. I'm trying to be very non-specific about the day. If you say, hey, it's going to be up here by Monday, that's just going to cost me
I'm hoping that it does happen. I have faith in myself that we'll get her done.
Do we really need to do a ceremony for this?
I think so. Maybe just, listen, we'll have it on the desk when we start the show, and then I'll place it, and that'll be it. Just a little quick little thing.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. Boy, that sounds like a good time there. Let me do item number 5 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Speaking of Alabama, did Kirby Smart's time in Alabama help him for a reason that may be different than some people might think? Let's talk about that right now. Obviously, Kirby Smart, the Georgia Bulldogs, the #1 class in the entire country for 2018, and that's impressive in its own right. What makes it a little bit more impressive maybe is the fact that for Kirby, it came on the heels of having to be in the SEC championship game when he wasn't allowed to make any kind of in-home visits that week, also preparing for the college football playoff at the same time. That's a time crunch that made it difficult to reach out and do all the recruiting work that needed to be done. Kirby Smart talked about that yesterday when he gave his press conference after signing day was completed.
It's hard to argue with the results we were able to achieve. I think it was a blessing to be in the situation we were in, meaning we lost a week on the road recruiting because of the SEC championship game. I would think people that didn't play in the SEC championship game would get a huge advantage by being out that week, that close to a signing date. That was really kind of 2 weeks or 3 weeks from a signing date, and they were able to get a little bit of an advantage. We lost that, but we also gained the momentum of the exposure. So I like that part of it. But preparing for a college football playoff and having that early signing period is really challenging to focus and get the attention of the coaching staff and the support staff in the right direction. So there were some challenges there for it.
Challenges, but then on an SEC Network interview yesterday, he actually spoke about how he was able to handle those challenges, saying that his time in Alabama actually helped him. I think this is an interesting point from Kirby Smart, potentially true. Here's a little more from Kirby, this time from the SEC Network, on how it was he was able to handle those challenges.
There's nothing that could have prepared me well for that other than having 2 jobs about 2 years ago when we were getting ready to play Clemson. The time constraints were really tough, and I thought that our staff really took advantage of that.
Do you agree with Kirby Smart that going back to the end of the 2015 season, the start of his tenure at Georgia, which led to National Signing Day in 2016, that splitting up and being Alabama defensive coordinator at the same time that he was putting together what was a top 10 class for Georgia in 2016, that doing double duty there helped him do the double duty in December as well?
Yeah, I definitely do. It's something that I know is tough, that obviously, Jeremy Pruitt and company went through this past year. I do find it funny, and I don't blame him one bit. It was like a little bit of tasting yourself in there if you're Kirby Smart.
What are you all laughing at?
I don't know what they're laughing at, but I was listening to Kirby Smart, and he's like, boy, we did this class even missing a couple of weeks back in there. We missed back in December. We missed a couple of weeks in January at the Rose Bowl and all this stuff. But I don't blame him at all. I mean, he should give himself a pat on the back for obviously what they got done yesterday.
You think he's bragging right there?
Oh, there's no doubt. I don't see how he should brag. I don't fault him at all. I think he's bragging for sure, and I think he should. And I think he's kind of saying, listen, we got all this done despite the fact that I missed all this time, and here's why, because I was prepared for this.
Hold on. This is not the road I thought you were going to go down at all. You mean play you audio of Saban's whining about the playoff?
Oh, no. I never said he shouldn't.
Saban had an extra week that Kirby Smart didn't have.
I never said that he shouldn't. That's what I think he's trying to say, though. That's what I'm saying.
He's sitting at home eating popcorn while George won the SEC.
He's saying, listen, Nick Saban's the great. He's been recruiting, but you know what? We had one last week, and we
just heard from Gus Malzahn. He talked about the same thing. The SEC championship, letting everybody else have a head start with you in recruiting, the SEC championship made it hard.
It was a big deal.
Kirby Smart's not bragging right there.
Listen,
Kirby Smart's just...
I'm not saying you shouldn't. I love the fact that he's bragging, but there's no other way for me to take that. I think he's definitely giving himself a tap on the shoulder, and he should. The class is historically good, and the fact that he was able to do that minus with the restrictions that he had going to these bowl games is a big plus.
But do you think that the time in Alabama helped him?
Yes, I definitely do. I think that having to split that time and having to kind of really manage what you were doing throughout January was a big deal for him, and obviously hits a home run and a grand slam in his ways of doing it now.
James Crump says the Georgia team from last year is what you're going to see for a long time. Richt isn't coming back to coach Georgia, and it is amazing. And obviously, Georgia fans still have a lot of reverence for Mark Richt. It's 15 really good years there, but Rick was a good recruiter. Kirby Smart has so far proven to be a great recruiter. I mean,
yeah, he's elite. Elite is the right word right now for what he's doing.
What do you think is? I mean, Kirby. You spent time with him at Tuscaloosa. What do you think makes him different from Rick?
Well, listen, I think that you can have guys like Kirby that can relate so well. I think Dabo's doing this right now at an elite level as well. I don't think that Nick Saban is doing this right now at an elite level. He's relating to these kids. We talk about relationships. We talk about Jeremy Pruitt. You talk about Kirby Smart. He's building relationships. He can go sit there, kick his feet up on a couch, watch a movie with somebody, eat some popcorn, and say, hey, man, we're going to be buddy-buddy. We're going to be friends. Come in here and help us win championships. That's not something Nick Saban can do. Nick Saban goes in there wearing his penny loafers. He's got his Argyle sweater on. He sits there. He chats with the mom. He talks about whatever he wants to. He's not buddy-buddy. He's very CEO-like.
Jeremy Pettis says, I'm being salty, that if the Mutts would have won the national championship, there'd be a ceremony for sure. Honestly, look, what y'all got to realize if you're an Alabama fan is there's 13 groups of fans that don't want us talking about Alabama as much as we do, okay? So let me tell you what's going to happen to these, Facebook boxes when we start, unveiling this 17 helmet. We're going to get nothing but complaints from whatever, percentage 13 schools out of 14 is. We're going to get nothing but complaints from all of them. I'm trying to save the rest of our fan bases here. This is not a Georgia-Alabama thing. This is an Alabama versus everybody else thing.
I didn't push the issue. I'm glad that it's finally going up. We don't have to hear from anybody anymore about the 17.
I love that you were patting yourself in the back for this thing finally going up when it hasn't even happened. That 15's still sitting there.
Yeah. Yeah,
you know what?
It's empty.
You know what?
It's empty. The 15's empty.
This thing is not ready by Monday.
You're gonna you're calling me out on that?
This thing is not gonna be ready by Monday.
That go ahead and put a check mark, guys, in the box.
There is not gonna be
push me over the edge.
Somehow I don't quite think this is gonna work out the way that it did. By the way, Andy Anderson in the comment section says, but how did Jimbo finish his class behind Willie Taggart when Taggart was ranked 70th when he started? I don't know how we get to Willie Taggart here, but nonetheless, she says Taggart at Florida State actually finished ahead of all the new coaches. Not good news for Florida. Actually, that is a little bit of an interesting point. That for all of Dan Mullen's bragging, we're going to hear him in a moment. He didn't even win the state yesterday.
No, he didn't. He didn't. He was pushing in a lot of different directions, and but I go back to this. Like, what do you expect him to say? I mean, he's not going to sit there and say, "Man, we really struck out on some of the guys who won it today." They won some big battles, and they won Jacob Copeland. They won Malik Langum. They won some players that they needed to get, and I think that. With the trends, obviously, it's not a number one recruiting class, but with the trends, I still feel good about the direction Florida's headed.
So Justin Sisk says you should take the 15 helmet and sign it, pick a Bama viewer to win it. Here's the thing, though. I don't know what kind of budget you think we're operating with here on SEC Country Live. We're not getting a new helmet. We're just going to peel the 15 off and put a 17 up there. We don't have enough money to start sending these helmets out in the mail.
No, that helmet's got to stay.
There's no telling what the shipping costs on a football helmet is.
Yeah, no doubt.
I don't know what kind of budget you think we're operating with here, but we're not that kind of operation.
Let's bring up a good point. Maybe we should send out some swags. You got the Own the E-shirts, something like that?
The swag that I have, I don't think 14ths of our audience wants either.
SEC country shirt, something like that.
Yeah, we'll see if we can do that at some point in time. All right, speaking of Dan Mullen, let's talk about him here. Item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10. Asked a lot of questions when he met with the media yesterday. Also kind of the same theme that we've heard from some other coaches. Hey, what's it like on this National Signing Day? A lot of things happen for you in December. This is a new recruiting calendar. Florida also a little bit unique here, and it kind of went down to the wire and waiting to find out about a couple guys. Here's what Mullen's reaction was to his first February signing day as Florida coach.
It's been a crazy day, and to me, even guys you feel comfortable with, until you get that. We're at a new technological stage, so the picture on the phone instead of the fax, right? There's annual National Fax Day, Fax Machine Day. Until you get that picture of the fax, till you get it through and you have the official copy of it right there. Even the guys you feel good and you know are coming, you're still worried about until it is official. But our coaches were grinding. They were working all night. They were working all day. They've been working since the day we got here to put this class together.
Are you a little disappointed to find out that this fax machine deal is not quite as big a deal as it used to be? That he said that now you're getting like the sort of like scanned image of the letter of intent coming through on the phone. There was something I've always kind of liked about like National Signing Day being the least technological day on the entire calendar for any industry whatsoever. That the fax machines were still humming. I'm sort of a little disappointed to find that out.
Yeah, I remember Alabama when I was in school. I think it was like around 2007. They kind of got in trouble a little bit over they had a fax machine and then they had a camera that was set up on a website. And they had, one of the Bama Bells that would always come and check the fax machine. It wasn't ever a coach. It was like, one of the younger women in the office coming to check the fax machine. They had to shut that down.
Bama Bells?
They Bama Bells. That's what they're called. Bama
Love
Bells.
that.
Yeah, they had to come check the fax machine, and they got in a little bit of trouble. But you're right. It takes away a little bit. It's not it's not the old school approach that it used to be. It's definitely a lot different these days.
It's probably not the only thing the Bama Bells got in trouble for, but
I'm not going down that road with you. I'm not doing it. I am not doing it.
Anyway, on the Florida class, how we feel that Mullen did.
No, I think he did good. I think that he closed hard. I think that, listen, if he would have missed on Copeland, if he would have missed on some other guys, I think you would have scratch your head and say, man, what are we really heading towards? But I thought they filled some position needs. I think when you look at the pair of safeties they got, those guys are kind of fall in line with the whole DBU aspect, the fact that they have a speedy secondary. I like the Watkins kid. I think he adds a nice piece. And really, this all goes back to Emory Jones and the early signing period. I thought that win really already kind of capped off signing day for them. I don't think they were going to add a bigger piece or a bigger deal to this team because I think he makes an immediate impact. I think you got to get him on the field this year and start developing him under Dan Mullen. So anybody they added yesterday, obviously a big deal. But when you talk about Trey Dean, the likes of guys like that in that secondary, I think this is a good signing class for them. I think it's well rounded.
Yeah, listen, I can point to what Florida didn't do, and obviously I'm somewhat motivated to do that. But overall, as we said over and over again, it's better than almost anything Jim McElwain was going to do. The likes of Trey Dean, that's a really interesting prospect. Going
Amari Burney was another one. Safety, great player. I think he's going to be pretty good.
Chatfield, the linebacker they added yesterday. I mean, Florida got itself some good players. And you know what? Florida is sort of putting itself in a position right now. I mean, we'll hear from Will Muschamp later on. I think South Carolina's kind of an interesting looking school. But Florida, I think, put some distance between itself and Tennessee yesterday.
I think that Florida... It's going down that road of starting to establish itself as that East power that you've always known it to be. The fact that Florida's, the South Florida's in your backyard, you should have a ton of recruits down there. I think the fact that you keep Jacob Copeland in state's a big deal. I think the fact that you go get a Malik Langum from Alabama is a big deal. And so, while it's not, like we said, it's not that top 10 class that we talk about as kind of on the verge of sending teams into championship contention, I don't think there's any reason to think that Dan Mullen's not building towards being able to do that.
All right, we got a lot of people weighing in on the helmet situation here. Chad Clark says the Bama change over to 17 deserves a little bit of a ceremony. We'll see what we can come up with for that. I don't know. Steven Sanders wants the 15 helmet. Steven, I'm telling you, we're not getting rid of this helmet. We don't have like some unlimited budget. Like, this is not like the thing in like Major League Baseball where you get like a brand new shiny hat every single day. These helmets are the only helmets we have. And at some point in time, we may do something a little bit different back here on our wall, but for now, these are the only helmets we have. We're not giving that 15 helmet away. We're just going to peel that sticker off. Chad Clark says we need to put a UCF helmet up there.
Oh, God.
I think that's something we can all agree on. We have no interest in seeing. Cliff Nelson says there shouldn't be an Alabama ceremony for the helmet until you watch Talladega Nights. This is something you're talking about on Twitter today.
Yeah, I've definitely. I watched Days of Thunder Day. I've seen my movie knowledge. There's like a blank from like 1990 to like 04. Once I got to college, once I graduated high school, Talladega Nights is definitely. It's a great movie.
Chris Smith says I'm visibly shook. Says I haven't gotten over the loss to Alabama. I think you would. Now maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you will say different. I think you would attest to the fact I'm not that shook by this.
No.
I mean,
listen, I gave BA a bumper of like 2 days where I didn't even bring it up. I didn't want to say anything about it, but he's been fine since then.
Now, listen, I was devastated in the moment, but the truth is, I feel good about where Georgia's going.
Yeah, you should.
I'm a little concerned about where Alabama's going, but I feel good. Michael Clyburn says that Mississippi State got a new helmet. Is that true? Yo, we can't be affording to buy these.
Well, no, I think they already bought it. That's the new one, isn't it? Isn't that the new one?
Is this the new Mississippi State helmet or not?
Yeah.
Oh, Mississippi State sent it to us.
Brandon Walker got that one. And,
boy, our relationship with them is a lot different than it is with some SEC schools, Dan. That's a different topic for a different day, but thank you to the folks over in Stark Vegas for sending that to us. That's really really nice there. By the way, speaking of Alabama, let's do item number 7 here in our SEC Country Live first and 10 list. So Saban obviously got a lot. It's a top 10 class, and for some Alabama fans, maybe a disappointment that it wasn't number 1 overall again, but it was still a better class than most. But Nick Saban spent some time yesterday talking about some of the guys that he might still like to add. We talked about earlier Carl Dunbar, the defensive line coach, maybe moving on to the New York Jets. Saban says that's the position group he wants to maybe see another guy added here before the 2018 season starts. Here's Nick Saban on the subject of defensive linemen.
We're actually hoping to maybe get one more defensive lineman in this class. We feel really good about the 2 guys that we got. Again, we'd probably, if we had our druthers, we'd have got one more guy at that position, and we'll continue to maybe look and evaluate and see if there's somebody out there that would help us.
I think the transfer market is a massive, massive deal here, especially with, and look, the signing rules are confusing to me. How many guys above 25 can you sign? I still don't quite understand that after yesterday. I'm going to be completely honest, but it's certainly more restrictive now than it used to be.
Yeah.
Given that's the case, that means that schools like Alabama, the way they're going to add players going forward is going to be with transfers. And we've seen, think about the kid they got from Oregon State a couple years ago that caught a big pass.
Richard Mullaney.
Yeah, Mullaney. Yeah, I couldn't remember his name. But that's sort of a below-the-radar transfer, and he's catching a ball for you in a national championship.
Yeah.
Alabama's going to be looking to add those kind of guys. LSU did it last year. I think Saban's somewhat more like the grad transfer thing when he says that there, maybe. But I think that transfers are already kind of a big deal in the SEC, but it's about to become bigger.
I think it's going to become a huge deal, and Nick Saban also alluded in that press conference to a quarterback joining the roster.
Yeah, we'll hear that in just a moment.
I didn't want to jump out in front of anything, but I think this is kind of a twofold presser where he's going to talk to the fans about what he wants to, but he's also kind of putting that message out to anybody that might be on the market. You know what I mean? It's like he can't like directly kind of involve some of these guys that might be transferring or might not be transferring, but it's like, hey, if anybody's listening to this press conference out there that wants a home and needs a scholarship and wants to come play for a championship, boy, we've got a couple openings right here. I think Nick Saban kind of pulled dual duty in the way he was kind of putting it out there. I don't blame him. I think you add as many quality players as you can, and the fact of the matter is Alabama only signed like 20 guys yesterday, so there are some open scholarships.
Well, in fact, let's hear him on the quarterback subject because they didn't sign a quarterback for the first time in many years. Certainly, I think for the entirety of the Nick Saban era.
I think it's since 04 was the first. Yeah, it's the first time since then.
So Saban did kind of address the quarterback situation, both in terms of what they might do this year, also maybe a little bit of a foreshadowing for what they may do in the 2019, or it would be the 2019 class. Take a listen to this.
I think that we'll probably have a quarterback join us some kind of way between now and then, which I don't think I can comment about. But look, when you have really good young players at a position, sometimes it's hard to attract another guy at that particular position. So I think you all know our circumstance at quarterback right now with the players that we have here and what grade they're in and how much more eligibility they have. So rather than reach for somebody, we would rather try to solve the issue maybe a different way with maybe a more experienced guy down the road. And, certainly think that next year we might be in a position to get a really good player at that position who could be someone who could impact us in the future.
He's obviously talking about Talia Tagovailoa. Let me try that one more time. He's obviously talking about, is it Talia Tagovailoa?
Talia.
Yeah, Talia Tagovailoa to his brother. That's obviously who he's referencing there with the quarterback we could get next year. But in terms of bringing in the transfer player this year, I think that makes a ton of sense. I think it's much smarter to bring in a sort of mid-level quarterback, even if it's a quarterback that lost his starting job somewhere else.
Yeah.
Makes a lot more sense to bring a guy like that in as sort of like a one-year holdover stopgap, as opposed to reaching for a guy that you don't think is good enough to play for Alabama long-term. That's a scholarship spot you're trying to figure out something to do with 2 years after the fact. So that's actually pretty good roster management there by Nick Saban.
Yeah, I thought it was carefully worded by Nick Saban in the press conference. I thought he did a good job of, and you can feel him kind of riding that line. And it sounded to me, you tell me, it sounded like he already had a transfer quarterback in mind. It was like, I don't know how much I can talk about that, and I don't know who he's talking about.
Okay, so it is interesting here. Maybe some Alabama fans can actually weigh in and help us on this, because I actually watched the video of this. When Saban's talking, when he says that, when he says, I don't think I can talk about that, he actually turned and looked at his SID.
Josh Maxson.
Because, and the same thing happened in the press conference a little earlier with, who was the four-star kid that Alabama added, right towards the end of the day?
Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, Jalen Waddle. A reporter asked Saban, are you allowed to talk about Jalen Waddle yet? Because a coach cannot talk about a prospective recruit. It has to be a signed player for a coach to speak publicly about him. And so when the reporter asked Saban that, Saban turned, looked at the SID to see if the letter of intent had been received. When the quarterback subject came up, Saban turns and does the exact same thing. He turns to look, which led me to believe what you just said.
Yeah.
They've already got the quarterback in mind. And maybe Alabama fans in our comment section know the rumors of who it might be. Listen, I'll let you speculate about this. I don't care. But it certainly seemed like Saban had some idea of who it might have been.
And listen, you guys might have heard something I didn't. Obviously I've got my fingers on the pulse of what's going on there. I'm not sure who he's talking about, and I would love to be able to find out for myself. I've asked a couple of people. I drew a couple of blanks. Maybe there has been something that's been written on some message board somewhere, but I love the way he kind of worded this. It was also like a shout out to next year. And you missing Talia Tagovailoa. You also talking about Paul Tyson, who is Bear Bryant's great grandson. They expect to maybe be able to sign him too.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
It should be a very good quarterback class for them. And I think that Nick Saban's alluding to the fact that they feel okay moving forward with what the depth will be in that quarterback.
That is certainly a good point. Let me hear from a couple other coaches here. It's item number 8 on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. And it's kind of funny. 2 different SEC coaches making essentially the same claim that 2018 was what it was, but wait till you see 2019. It's going to be great in 2019. One of these may be a little easier to believe than the other based on how yesterday unfolded. Let me first show you what Jimbo Fisher told Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports about what he thinks 2019 is going to end up being. He says we're going to end up being 1 or 2. I'm talking about 10 guys that are right there. I'm talking about first, second round pick type guys. There's some phenomenal players. So Jimbo Fisher says he's going to be one of the top 2 classes in the country next year. Now, let me tell you what I love about this before we get to the actual facts of what he's saying. I love that he's referencing the class ranking. We're either going to be the number 1 or the number 2 class.
Yeah.
Because most of these coaches, Kirby Smart included, are like, I don't care about class ranking. Number 1 class doesn't mean anything to me. All I care about is, and he goes on and lists some laundry list of sort of platitudes that these players have attached to their names. They sort of pretend like they don't care about number 1 rankings, but the only schools that ever win anything are the ones that get the number 1 rankings. I like the fact that Jimbo Fisher calls it what it is, a race to be number 1 or a race to be number 2. It's actually kind of a cool thing from Jimbo there.
Yeah, he's like self-instilling some of the momentum. It's like we talk about the momentum on the recruiting show.
But for me, it's that he's admitting that class rankings exist. No, these coaches feel like class rankings don't even exist.
No, I do. I think I think the reason he brings it up is because he knows next year's class looks good for him right now. I think that, listen, if you were at another school and you're Ed Orgeron and you're talking about class rankings right now, it's not going to be a good look. He looks at Texas A&M's class ranking for 2019. He knows that it's building building in the right direction. So he's like, I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to go and talk about it. It's just going to build on more momentum towards next year. And we can have other recruits that listen to this and say, man, you know what? They really are building something special right there in the state of Texas. Maybe I should take a look at them too.
Yeah, I think that's probably exactly right. And you know what? I kind of believe Jimbo Fisher on this. I probably believe him more right now than I do the other coach who said something close to the same thing. Wes Rucker, who covers Tennessee for 24/7 Sports, tweeted out a quote from Tennessee coach Jeremy Pruitt saying, give this staff a full year. When you look at the rankings next year on National Signing Day, we're going to be right at the top. Well, listen, there's not room for everybody at the top. And so if A&M's coming up and if Tennessee's coming up, then somebody's going to be going back down. Now, my point is, do you believe both these coaches? Is Jimbo obviously the guy that has the better chance of doing this in comparison to Jeremy Pruitt here?
He definitely has a better start. You know, I trust in Jeremy Pruitt because I know Jeremy Pruitt. I've seen his recruiting performances. I've seen what he's been able to do in a lot of circumstances. I've also seen the relationships he's already started to develop. And that was a big word for J.J. Peterson. It was a big word for Quay Walker and Jacob Copeland. When they were taking their looks, Isaac Taylor Stewart was another guy who felt good about the relationship. Now all of a sudden it's not a last-minute thing. Now all of a sudden it's not Jeremy Pruitt after a national championship game. Now all of a sudden it's Jeremy Pruitt given a year to kind of get these guys on campus, hang out with them, let these guys see the atmosphere. I mean, we talked about J.J. Peterson. Guy didn't even make it to Knoxville. I mean, you know, it's one of those things where given another year, I'm sure that Jeremy Pruitt will make a jump. Now, if he's talking about a first or second ranked class, boy, you're right. There's not a lot of room for that. But if we're talking about top 10, I think it's doable for Jeremy Pruitt.
But here's the tricky thing, though. Relationships expire. You know, if you're an assistant coach, you got great relationships. But with recruits, especially at a place like Alabama, but that's only true for the next two recruiting classes. Like, so for Jeremy Pruitt, he leaves Alabama, goes to Tennessee. He knows these 2018 guys really well. Look at all the 5 stars that took official visits to Tennessee. He knew them well enough to get official visits. He also is going to have really good relationships with 2019 kids because that's who Alabama's been recruiting. By the time you get to 2020, those personal relationships that Pruitt would have had at Alabama, a lot of those have kind of expired because those kids have either come to Tennessee, gone somewhere else. The 2020 kids, they're not spending that much time with Jeremy Pruitt at Alabama, which brings me to Tennessee on the field. There's a chance I think Tennessee goes like 4-8 this year. Okay,
yeah.
So at that point in time, if you're trying to pick up the phone and call these recruits, are they answering the phone quite as much? Are they responding to text quite as much? Good relationship. But you got to prove them something on the field.
You got to win at some point.
Yeah,
you got to win at some point. And obviously,
you got to win something. You don't have to go 9-3, but you got to beat a good team somewhere along the way.
I've mentioned this before. He needs to win the games he's supposed to win. That's the bottom line. That's what you have to do in year one at Tennessee. You have to win the games you're supposed to win. You can't give up the games to Kentucky and Vanderbilt and think you're still going to be in the good grace with all these people. But I brought this up on this show before. Jeremy Pruitt, I would love to know the numbers of scholarships that they handed out back in December. It's got to be in the 30s. Yeah. It's got to be something astronomical because they were going all around the state of Georgia, the state of Alabama, and the state of Florida handing out scholarships like they were in a parade throwing candy out. It was crazy. I mean, you talk about sophomores in high school, they're going to hand out these guys. And so I think that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to say, you know what? I need to keep the relationships going in all these recruiting databases if I'm going to get these guys up to Knoxville and at least get an official visit out of this deal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Let me try to hit a couple of comments in the comment section. We'll kind of weigh in on a lot of this kind of stuff. By the way, Ahmad Ricky says Doug Nussmeier potentially going to LSU. You and I were talking about this before the show. That's kind of late breaking. What is out there about the Doug Nussmeier thing right now? Can you fill us in any of the details on this?
Yeah, it was kind of late breaking. I don't think it's official. I don't think it's officially come out, but a lot of people are obviously expecting it. To me, this is a big deal because in the same way that Michael Locksley and Dan Enos kind of come together and it kind of gives Michael Locksley a sounding board, I think when you're going to go from within for that offensive coordinator position, give them a sounding board that comes from outside of the program, something you haven't seen. Maybe there's a play back in Nussmeier's past that you can say, you know what, this play works really well. I think LSU needed a step in that direction.
The difference here, though, is Nussmeier, the former Florida, Alabama, and Michigan offensive coordinator, this is a well-traveled guy. Enos is going to be an on-field coach for Alabama, whereas according to what I'm reading here at the Baton Rouge Advocate, Nussmeier would only be a analyst. So he'd fill the same role that Alabama, Georgia, a lot of these schools have had 1 million analysts. That's the role that Nussmeier would be in. If you're an LSU fan, are you excited about Doug Nussmeier given the fact that, he probably wore out his welcome in Alabama. I mean, no one leaves Alabama to go to Michigan. The odds are, Saban may have Carl Dunbar him up to Ann Arbor.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that happened.
So there's that on the resume. The Michigan time was what it was. That was for coaching staff that eventually got fired. And the Florida offensive time, they never found a quarterback. it's nice to have an extra pair of hands on deck, I guess, but how excited are you for a guy that really hasn't had a lot of offensive success recently?
I think you're excited because what's the downside? What's the downside of having him on campus?
Him than not.
He's not, like you said, he's not going to be an on-field coach. He's just going to be one of those guys that is a sounding board. It's a sounding board for Steve Ensminger. He's one of those guys that can be in the meetings, he can watch some film, and you can sound off to him about what's going on, and maybe he's able to add a little dynamic behind the scenes that might help you out in the long run. I don't think there's any downside to him being on campus.
To go back to the Jimbo Fisher, Jeremy Pruitt comparison, Trey Duke says he believes more in Jimbo Fisher than he does in Pruitt. He says Tennessee just proved to be a dumpster fire. I don't think that Tennessee proved to be a dumpster fire. J.J. Peterson is an example of a player that Butch Jones wasn't getting and Greg Schiano wasn't going to get. So that's a better recruit just on an individual basis than someone they would have gotten. But the heat, the momentum that I thought Tennessee would be developing, Jeremy Pruitt didn't really get much of that.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we were saying. He's going to have to show the product on the field. You don't know really what Tennessee's going to look like. It's like, you have to build this team and you have to get these players to believe in what they're signing up for. And right now, there's just nothing to point to at Tennessee.
All right, by the way, we are late here. Let me see if I can get running here on a couple other topics. Let me hear from Will Muschamp. It's item number 9 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Muschamp putting together some pretty good classes here for South Carolina, and he was pretty happy with what he got yesterday. Here's a little bit from Coach Boom, as they call him.
We got better today, and I'll say the same thing every year. We'll know about this class in 2 or 3 years. At the end of the day, you got football's a developmental game, and the recruiting process is the evaluation, the recruitment, and then the development when they get on campus. And that's the process that we're in right now as far as that's concerned when they get here.
I think South Carolina did get better. I think beating out Georgia for a player like Rick Sandage, also beat out North Carolina for him as well. A big 4-star defensive tackle. Reminds me a lot of what Carolina did last year when it brought in Jamias Williams, another defensive back, in this case a defensive back from the state of Georgia. That's a big-time win that a lot of folks wanted. Muschamp was getting it. I think Muschamp's a pretty good recruiter. I think South Carolina's in pretty good shape. They are my second best team in the East right now.
Yeah, listen, I think the position's a need. Obviously, when you want to run a Will Muschamp style of defense, you got to have the Ricky Sandages, you got to have the J.C. Horns, you got to have those guys at those positions where it's tough to find guys. The SEC style of bodies, the big guys in the middle, the guys that can rush the edge, and the guys that can be in man-to-man coverage. And I think that's exactly, when you look at the list of people he signed, linebackers, defensive tackles, defensive ends, and secondary members, I think that this was a well choreographed class. It's not going to be record breaking. I think they're right there inside the top 20. But this is a class that fills a lot of needs at South Carolina if you want to run this Will Muschamp style of defense.
Yeah, it really is. But a pretty good day for the South Carolina Gamecocks overall. Item number 10 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. A little bit of an update on the Jacob Copeland story we talked about yesterday. And by the way, Sean McKenzie in the comment section, one of many, reminding me that I guess at one point I said that Copeland wasn't going to Florida. Well, you know what? Copeland did go to Florida, although somewhat painfully, maybe? I don't know. Let me show you the video again of how this goes down yesterday. You see Copeland put on the Florida hat. You see his mom sort of dual dressed in the third Saturday in October rivalry. She got the Tennessee toboggan on and the Alabama sweatshirt there. You don't see a lot of that combination. But she was upset, and she gets her purse, and she's leaving. She's kind of storming off the set, and we kind of were confused by what this was yesterday. Copeland tweeted about it, though, and it actually comes to the defense of his mom here a little bit, which a good son would do, I guess. He says, what my mama did today was hilarious. If you knew her personally, that's her job. Put on a show. Now, I think that Copeland's being a real gentleman here. I think it's a cool thing to do, to kind of sort of get out in front of this for his mom and provide her a little bit of a heat shield there. So I think that that's kind of a cool thing for Copeland to do. But you and I would both agree that that's not her job to put on a show in that moment.
I definitely agree. And I think you're right. Jacob Copeland getting out in front of this, kind of helping his mom out a little bit. I think obviously he knows her personality, but if that's her personality, I don't like her personality. I mean, that's the bottom line. And you know what was also kind of a funny thing, and I didn't even bring this up to you. Did you see Landon Collins actually responded to his tweet and said, hey, if you need to talk, hit me up. I've been through this before.
Oh, that's great.
I thought that was pretty hilarious, and obviously Landon Collins, his mom made a big deal as well. But just storming off, wearing the Alabama-Tennessee stuff, right? Walks in front of the camera on national television. Not my cup of tea.
The only thing about it that I can't get over, and listen, we have seen, as you said with Landon Collins, we've seen parents not want their kids to go to schools before. We've seen all that. But can I see the video one more time? Because the one thing that does give some credibility to what Copeland says is, and we talked about this yesterday, nobody's surprised when she walks off. Like, no one reacts to it. No one thinks anything about it. I mean, is there a chance that somehow this was all sort of like a joke gone wrong? I mean, the Tennessee-Alabama hat together. I mean, is there a chance that this was all just sort of a troll job?
I don't know. The guy on the right doesn't look like it's a joke at all. He looks so confused. He's like watching her walk in front, like, where are you going? Like, you know, I don't think it was choreographed. I don't know if it was a troll job. I'm
also guessing the guy on the right hasn't had dinner with Jacob Copeland's mom.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like he sort of seems like the one guy that knows this family less than the rest of them do. So
it looks like an outlier.
You know, maybe a bit of an outlier. I mean, is there a chance that this really was like a planned deal and they meant for it to be funny somehow and it just didn't really work out that way?
If it was a planned deal, I think we're giving a lot of people a lot of credit that I don't know if we should. I just think that, listen, she stormed off. She was in the heat of the moment. She thought that you know, this is what she's going to do. Obviously, he's comfortable with it. I'm not comfortable with it. I don't know what the story was.
All right, let's get ready to close the show. You know, we do it the same way every day. We're always looking for champions of life, and today it comes from one of our own. We do SEC Country Live every single day. We also have some individual team shows and some of the individual Facebook pages. I do Dog Nation daily at dognation.com every day. We appreciate all the Georgia fans who check that out. We also have our buddy Brandon Walker, who does the Mississippi State show for us on the Mississippi State SEC Country Facebook page. It's always a lot of fun. The other day, when Brandon Walker was getting ready to begin his show, a little bit of a mishap. He spills his drink, but he doesn't skip a beat. I think this is hilarious. Take a look at it.
Brought to you by SEC Country. And now, your host of the More Cowbell Show, Brandon Walker.
Man.
Now watch this. Watch this.
Hi, more cowbell.
Yeah.
My favorite thing is
watch the cup. I mean, it's like you have to focus on. Oh my God!
But what's perfect is, and Michael and Hannah, two of the folks that help us with our show, are also kind of directing this show as well. The camera change for the cup. That's like perfect timing, right? Like you couldn't have planned it to go better than that. Yeah. It falls off, and then you completely change and hit the second angle of the camera falling. That's almost like my favorite part of the whole video.
No, it's so funny. Listen, Esteban Estevez holding nothing back says, ha ha ha, loser. I mean,
Esteban.
Oh man, that's
we love our buddy Brandon Walker.
That's hilarious.
That is funny stuff. If you're a Mississippi State fan, you should check out More Cowbell, both in podcast form at SECCountry.com and on the SEC Country Mississippi State Facebook page. All right, y'all have a great week, and that'll finish up the week for us here in SEC Country Live. We'll be back at Monday again, 3 p.m. Eastern Time for another episode of the program. A lot to get into here as the recruiting season sort of transitions to the start of spring practice. It's going to be fun. We'll be here with you every day for it, right here on SEC Country Live.